To the Moon and Back by Patricia Asedegbega. Anne. Even before she walked through the big glass doors leading to the interior of the bar, Anne could hear the loud music and people talking and laughing, an unmistakable sign that the night was going to be a huge success. She smiled as she took a deep breath and entered to meet up with her friends. She had been working very hard lately, taking all the extra shifts the matron could give her. It was all for the money, so she could think of many more ways to spend her free night. But Dr. Wale was one of the few doctors who treated the nursing staff with respect. So apart from not being able to ignore Amaka's insistent pleas, she wanted to show him her support on his big night. The snack bar was a great idea, especially since it was so near the clinic. Anne doubted she would be able to patronize it much, though it would probably be quite expensive, judging from the elegant look of the place. The room was full of people. Anne frantically searched for the familiar faces of her best friend and their co-workers. Gratefully, she sighted a raised hand that beckoned her to a table, and she went to join the girls. Like her, the three other girls had changed from their nurse uniforms and were looking quite different. Gone were the tired and scrubbed faces. Although they could hardly hear themselves above all the noise, it was a welcome distraction for them all. The other two girls, Bosse and Imade, were operating theater nurses that Amaka and Anne usually hung out with at the clinic. The first drink of the night was free, so they took turns going to the bar so as not to lose the table Amaka had fought so hard to get for them. Soon they were all settled with a drink and a plate of bread and suya they had all chipped in to buy. A few minutes later, a young man walked up to Bosse and asked her if she wanted to dance. The three other girls tried to act like they weren't intently watching what was going on as their friend got up and walked towards the dance floor, where a few other couples were already dancing. Amaka, who was quite selective, turned down a few proposals before accepting the outstretched hand of Dr. Ogumbo. Anne and Imade looked at each other. He didn't have a very good reputation when it came to women, and nurses in particular, but Anne knew her best friend was on a mission that evening. She had just broken up with her boyfriend, and she was on the lookout for her next victim. "I still don't understand how you are best friends," said Imade. "You are both so different." Anne smiled at her. It was a question most people who met them asked, and some even repeated in amazement after spending some time in their company. They were as different as day and night. Anne was fair, petite, of a reserved and quiet disposition, with two lovely dimples that lit up her whole face each time she smiled. Amaka, on the other hand, was tall, dark, and had a vivacious and impulsive personality. "We get along very well," Anne replied as Imade leaned closer. "Don't forget, we've known each other for more than 20 years. I think we understand each other perfectly, and somehow our differences don't seem to matter. We respect that we don't always agree on how to do things or share the same values. She's a great person, you know." They went on to comment on the lovely ambience of the bar and just how well the opening night was turning out. From time to time, someone would come over and ask them to dance. They turned down the offers as they were both in serious relationships. Imade was engaged to get married in a month's time to an engineer who lived in Lagos. Hence, she would relocate soon. Anne had been dating Ben for a little less than 4 years. They had just got engaged, and she kept looking at her ring just to be sure it had really happened. She was so happy. They hadn't fixed a date yet, but Ben said they could get married in about 6 months. She couldn't wait to finally marry the love of her life. Every few minutes she got a text message from him asking her not to talk to any man or enjoy herself. He was not letting her forget that she was unavailable. He didn't like it when his fiancée went out without him. He was quite possessive of her. Anne found this very endearing, but to Amaka, it was irritating. The familiar pain in her lower abdomen materialized once again. She had taken a number of painkillers, anticipating how the evening would go. Knowing the signs, soon it would become unbearable. But what scared her most was that lately, on 2 occasions, she had lost consciousness. She knew she was running out of time. Anne got up hastily and said she needed a bit of air, just as Amaka came back sweating and smiling to their table. She needed to get out of there quickly before anyone noticed something was wrong. By the time she got outside, she was sweating profusely and almost doubled over from the pain, barely making it outside before throwing up all the contents of her stomach on a nearby shrub, silently asking Dr. Wale for forgiveness. People looked at her without showing a lot of interest. They probably thought she was inebriated. Anne staggered to the back of the building, hoping to be alone, as she frantically searched the contents of her bag for her dihydrocodeine tablets. It was too soon since the last one, but she was past caring. She leaned against a mango tree, breathing heavily, and then, as if the ground beneath her vanished, she felt herself falling, and darkness enveloped her. Adrian. Adrian parked his red sports car amidst a cloud of dust and the sound of tires screeching before coming to a halt. He got out and looked around. He had been away from the country for over 20 years, and yet everything seemed very familiar. Nothing much appeared to have changed, apart from the fact that everyone seemed to have bought the latest electronic gadget. His phone beeped, indicating an incoming message, and he read that both Alero and Richard were already inside, waiting for him. Adrian walked in, oblivious to the undisguised stares he was getting from practically all the women in the establishment. Extremely good-looking and wealthy, the young man was the target of most mothers and their daughters. Word had spread that he was back in the country, and unknown to him, a lot of plans were being made to change his marital status. He went directly to the bar and shook Wale's hand. His host was talking to a group of people he had been in secondary school with. Much to Alero and Richard's dismay, he had accepted Wale's invitation to the inauguration of his snack bar because he had very fond memories of him when they were both teenagers. He remembered him as a noble and hard-working boy, and as they chatted, he felt that had not changed. He told him how much he liked the place and excused himself as he walked in the direction of his 2 disgruntled friends, sitting in one of the most private tables in the room. Alero and Richard looked quite bored and were making no attempt to hide it. "If you dislike this place so much, why on earth did you come?" Adrian said as he sat down next to his friends. "I mean, seriously, you both look like you think you might get a disease or something just by breathing the same air as the rest." And leave you here alone with all these hungry for marriage women? Alero replied, as she looked around to emphasize her point. A number of girls were whispering and looking in their direction. No, you men tend to make some very silly and costly mistakes, and I have to protect both of you. Well, said Richard, don't worry on our behalf. Adrian and I can take very good care of ourselves. In the 2 months we've been back, Adrian here has successfully avoided quite a number of attempts from his father to introduce him to women he considers appropriate wife material, and my mother is just the same. This could be the opportunity for you to look around for Mr. Right, though. I am sure your family will be expecting some news in the suitors department too. Try not to be on the shelf for long. It's not becoming. Richard yelped as Alero hit him, and Adrian listened to them bicker and tease each other. All of them had been away for quite a lot of time. He had left when he was 15 for the US, and 20 years later, after studying in the most renowned schools, he had come back to his own country as one of the best cardiovascular surgeons to open a private clinic with the latest state-of-the-art medical equipment. He had been open for only a month, and already people were flying in from all over the country to see him. Richard, who didn't really like children, but for some strange reason had taken up pediatrics as his specialty, was dragging his feet in finding the direction that his life should take. And Alera, with a degree in business administration, seemed to be likewise taking her time in finding what she would dedicate her acquired skills on. Adrian didn't know how long he would be staying. He simply wanted to get the clinic established and running, and then he'd decide what to do. He was brought back to the present by the sound of his mobile ringing. It was from the clinic. There was too much noise in the entrance, so he made a gesture to his friends that he was going to take the call outside, and moved towards the back patio. It was one of his doctors who worked for him, updating him on the status of a patient. He was just about to turn around and head back to his friends when he caught sight of a figure in the dark, leaning against a tree. He walked nearer to see if she was all right, and got there just in time to catch her before she hit the ground. He checked the woman's pulse and was just about to start some form of resuscitation when she opened her eyes and looked wildly around her, trying to sit up. She was evidently in a lot of pain, as each movement made her wince. Adrian helped her up. Then he noticed there was a trickle of blood going down her left leg. You need to go to a hospital. Thank you for your help. I'm fine, really. Before he could say anything more, she slowly turned around in the direction of the main entrance. Adrian uttered a curse under his breath and blocked her path. No, you are not fine. People who are fine don't lose consciousness, or bleed, or cry out in pain each time they make a movement. I am a doctor, and we are going to a hospital, and I strongly suggest we go to mine so as not to waste any time. So you can lean on me, or I can carry you if you keep resisting, but I am not going to let you go back home and take a few more painkillers whilst you pretend everything is going to be fine. Adrian read the struggle in her face. He knew he had hit the nail on the head. She was not planning to see a doctor. Not this night, at least. But she went pale when he mentioned the bleeding, and that stopped any more arguments from her. En route to the clinic, she didn't utter a single word, but the way she curled up on the back seat made it apparent she was in a lot of pain. He called ahead and as soon as the car entered through the gates, 2 nurses and one of the doctors came out with a stretcher and lifted the girl onto it. They took her in to be examined, and it was at that precise moment that he remembered he had left Alera and Richard at the opening of Wale's snack bar, an event they had made abundantly clear they didn't want to attend. He called them, and without more explanations, said that he'd had to rush to the clinic. He asked them to meet him at the club in an hour. They both happily agreed, as it was more their scene, and as he waited for someone to tell him what was going on with the girl he'd brought in, he went in to look in on some of his other patients. He saw he had a few missed calls from his mom and another from his dad. He was definitely not dealing with them tonight, or ever, if possible. Sometime later, Dave, the GP, walked in and showed him various x-rays and scans. There was no doubt about what was wrong with the girl he'd brought in, Anne. "Does she know?" he asked the other doctor. "I just got the results. I'm on my way to tell her, unless you want to do it." He looked hopefully at Adrian. The young doctor was still quite uncomfortable giving any form of bad news. "Fine, I'll do it. I don't know her, but Dave, you need to be able to develop a thick skin. Sometimes we have to give bad news, and your patients will want to hear it from you and not a stranger." Adrian took the file containing all the tests and walked towards the examining room and was in. He knocked, but she didn't hear him as she was on the phone. "Don't worry, darling, I'm fine. Just a little bit tired. I just need to get some sleep. I've been working too many shifts, and that takes its toll. No, don't come pick me up. I will get a cab. I'm not really good company now. I will see you soon, I promise. Have a good night, my love." She looked up at him as he shut the door, and she saw the file at once, making a valiant attempt to smile, but unable to do so. She knew what was coming. She held out her hand for it, and he watched her read it. "There must be some mistake. I saw my doctor last week. He said I still have time. These results can't be accurate. But it doesn't matter. I will repeat the test with my doctor as soon as I can. I'm sorry, there isn't any room for doubt. You might have had more time last week, but things have advanced very quickly. I'm afraid there is only one solution." Anne. She needed more time. She had been working so hard to gather the money for the operation that Dr. Olu was going to perform. Now this other doctor was telling her it was impossible to wait. There must be some mistake. And yet she had the results in front of her. She knew what she would have advised anyone who had the same diagnosis. She tried to stand up and get dressed. She needed to go home. In the morning, everything would be different. There would be a solution. There had to be. But the man who had brought her to the clinic made her lie down again. "No, you aren't going anywhere. We will put you on a drip and monitor you. I heard your phone conversation. It seems you haven't told my fiancé. No, I haven't. I haven't even gotten my head around it yet, and I'm looking at the alternatives, trying to decide. You have to tell him. You can't go through this alone. What about your family? Your friends? My parents have both passed away. Look, it's going to be fine. My doctor has told me how we are going to handle it. I have been taking extra shifts at the clinic. Soon, I will have the money required for the procedure. Listen, I'm getting married in 6 months' time, and I plan for it to be the happiest day of my life. Everything will be fine. I know it will. I get that you're in love and really eager to start a new life, but you are not being realistic. I am going to fax your test results to a colleague in Houston, and tomorrow we will look at your options. You can't wait to gather sufficient money before solving this. The clock is ticking, and not in your favor. Thinking you can go through all this alone, Houston? Anne listened to him in shock. She didn't have the money to pay for any of the tests he had ordered. She was saving for her operation. Why did he think she had waited so long? And he was talking of Houston? She had to stop him before things got any further. I am really grateful for all your help, but medical care is expensive, and I already have an arrangement with my doctor. Just let me do things my own way. I can't stay here tonight. I can't even imagine what a room here will cost. Please, let me know how much I owe you for the tests, and I will see how I can get the money. He looked at her, and for the first time that evening, she registered his features. He was evidently of mixed race parentage, tall, fit, and handsome. He had sideburns and a 2-day stubble that most women would find very attractive. But what surprised her most, especially because she hadn't noticed them before, were his arresting big grey eyes, which was not at all common in someone who was half African. We will talk of payment later. I don't want it to be a deciding factor. A nurse will come by in a few minutes and take you to a room. Try and get some rest. You have a long process ahead of you. Anne watched him leave the room, his words still ringing in her ears. She didn't think she'd be able to get any sleep at all. If there was one thing he was right about, it was that going through it all alone was immensely difficult. She wished her mother was by her side. She missed her terribly. She was wrong. As soon as she had been tucked into bed, she fell asleep, and when the nurse came back in the morning to check her vitals, for a moment Anne forgot where she was. Then it all came flooding back. Adrian came to see her with more results. The diagnosis the colleague he had consulted made, and she felt her world crumbling around her. She couldn't stop the tears from falling as she desperately tried to take in the young doctor's words. That evening, she sat down to write the most difficult letter she had ever written. There seemed to be no other way out, and she couldn't put it off any longer. Dear Ben, I have practiced the words over and over in my mind, but I still can't find the right ones to tell you that. Will Anne's letter start a series of devastating events? Will she be able to accept and live with the consequences of her actions? To find out the answers to these questions, get your ebook or paperback copy of To the Moon and Back from Amazon. This is a story that you can't afford. to miss.